Hi, and welcome to Kaleidoscope. I'm your host, Rachel Elliott. Today we have in the studio with us Elsie Austin / Ezel.
Thank you.
Local artistic genius, writing, music, art. Welcome to the show, Elsie.
Thank you, Rachel. I hadn't seen you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Yes, I have.
Well, tell us where you're from.
All right. I was fortunate for a writer's background to be born in an eccentric little country town, Lumpkin, Georgia, 39 miles from here. And my maternal grandfather was a Methodist preacher, and my paternal grandfather was the sheriff, and he ran the waterworks and the fire department. So I made many trips on that red fire truck when we would go to town, to Lumpkin. And so I was born in a boarding house on Main Street. They hadn't put the plaque up yet, but anyway, I was the noontime entertainment, and I remember that day very well. And my daddy almost chloroformed my mother. And, you know, they didn't get along too well after that. And then I moved to Cordele with my grandparents, the preacher, and stayed there until we moved to Cordele, Georgia, and that also was another town. There was a murder there, and a man was shot 26 times in the back. I've woven that into a story, and the funeral was at my granddaddy's church, and I remember going into that sanctuary, and the stained glass windows, that put another atmosphere in there, so I've used that in those times. And then fast forward to high school, which was Jordan High School, and I was a feature editor for the Carmen and Gray. Yay! And that love of writing and writing about people, which also shows in art, since I love faces. Be still. And
Don't paint me.
Oh yeah. So that kind of stuck with me, and then in the 70s, I attended a writing workshop at CSU to be taught by the awesome David Johnson, who do you say is, give his title at CSU?
Professor Emeritus.
Yes, and he also was a speaker at our Chattahoochee Valley Writers Conference one time, so that's the 70s. And so it just stays with me and stays with me. But you have to have a day job, because I had 3 daughters.
Oh, wow.
Allison, who turned out to be an accountant, and I tried to talk her out of it, but that's the way her mind works. And she and her, husband are accountants in Savannah, which is great. Then my middle daughter, Claire Tharp, is an artist and has taught art at Brookstone, and now she has 2 children, and she teaches art at St. Anne's. And the youngest one married a cowboy and moved to Wyoming. So thanks to my children, I have seen the USA. And she just now, having moved back to Columbus, finished and graduated at CSU. Yay, Rebecca. And so I had to have a day job.
Right.
And so I worked for accounting firms, and then for one company in bookkeeping for 18 years, but I was always writing. And during the interim was organist and pianist at Victory Heights Baptist Church, where I remember you and your wonderful parents.
And I remember seeing you and hearing you play.
Right. Yeah, I cooked on Wednesday nights and cleaned the ladies' room and mopped the floors and whatever it took. Taught Sunday school. And some of the pictures I have, copies of watercolors I did, or some of the young people I taught in Sunday school. So it just, you know, I was there when I wrote my first screenplay. And I'll show you, there's a picture in there of my pastor, and I'll explain how he figured into this. And Rhonda Mobley, who is director of Valley Rescue Mission,
Okay.
proofread it for me. She was a neighbor and church member, and we've been friends a long time. I want to give her credit for doing that for me. And so now I'm there. And when my girls all graduated from high school, college, got married, and whatever, the weight was off my shoulders, especially during the time I was a single mom. I got my reward job. I always wanted to have ministry, and a job came open at Valley Rescue Mission. So I went there, and I was crisis.
Okay.
People, help me, ring, ring, help me, all day. You just go home. I tell everybody that period of trying to help everybody was like trying to put out a volcanic fire with a teacup full of water. Just, rip your heart out every day. But during that time, Gary Hartman was leading us in a seminar study on experiencing God. And that teaches you to pay attention to everything that happens around you. You know, it's your purpose.
Right.
And when you feel the urge to do something, of course, it's got to be within the parameters of what the Word would teach. Then you're to be brave and go forth. And at that time, Sandra Okamoto, even though she doesn't know this yet, had written an article in the Ledger, a column, about a screenplay annual competition by the Motion Picture Academy.
Oh, wow.
Here I am in Experiencing God, and this column by her jumps out. This was about in January or February of 1995. And I don't know why, but I was told, okay, I had a story.
Right.
That I knew. And it was a screenplay competition in Hollywood. The Motion Picture Academy Nichols Fellowships. Why not? Isn't that silly?
No.
And I had never read a screenplay, much less written one. But I cut that article out, and I went to the library. I've got this book with me. There was one book on writing screenplays. And I checked it out, and I would work at the mission till 5 o'clock, come home, and write from 7 to 11. I had a Apple computer, and it sat on a little table at the end of my bed, and then my sewing machine was right behind there. Because also at Victory Heights, for 18 years, we had a live nativity.
Yes.
And I was in charge of the wise men. And Ferris was one of them. But, I never did get to be an angel or Mary for some odd reason. But I was stuck in the back with the wise men and trying to get them out there for 18 years. So,
So your sewing machine and your computer.
So that's where I was when I wrote my first screenplay. I'd come home. No, let me tell you this part. My daddy had been diagnosed with kidney cancer. And so this was the tail end of that. He died on Father's Day in 1995. Well, it's his nature that's in here, not my mother's, who was vice president at CB&T and left brain. But my daddy had that in him, so I guess that's where I got it. And I had a deadline of May, and so here I go because of that study we were doing.
Yeah.
And I'd start at 7 o'clock every night. Oh, then when I got off work at 5, I would go by their house, sit with my daddy a while. Then by 7, I was sitting there. Number one rule of writing, keep your derriere in the chair.
Yeah.
That's where it was, except I didn't write on Sundays, and I didn't write on Wednesday nights because, of course, I was married and Baptist.
Yeah.
And playing the piano and the organ. But anyway, because that was, for me, wouldn't have been right. So I had 3 or 4 months to do something I didn't know anything about.
Yeah.
But what I did was that helped me. I had subscribed to Writer's Digest for years, as well as the Artist magazine. But I guess all that lodged somewhere up here. And the idea of, I had the scenes, you know, the different segments of the story. And so I actually wrote down, because some of them were in the country, so it's like the Color Purple, or yeah. Some of the scenes were like a screenplay. It's going to tell you where it is, whether it's day or night. You know,
Right.
you establish the setting.
Yes.
And then it's just dialogue.
Yeah.
Well, so I just took the scenes and wrote them down of the stories I wanted to tell. And I had to get them in first chronological order that they happened. And then, like, in town, out town. You know, well, I had to get a storyboard. That's what it's called. Believe me, that helps. So there I had my scenes. It was all in my head. And because of the rich history of being born in the South,
Yeah.
especially Lumpkin, I had the voices in my head. And then this place I worked for 18 years was very rich in dialects. And so that was in my head. I didn't have any trouble with dialect and characters.
Mm-hmm.
And so there I was. That's what you do when you write. You just get it organized, the storyboard, and then what happens is this mysterious thing. These characters show up and walk and talk, and you're just the scribe. I saw it because a screenplay is a movie on paper.
Right.
You can't, it's not about what anybody's thinking or any of that stuff. It's what you can hear and see.
Right.
So it's active voice. And so I just said, okay, this is the scene. Now let them walk and talk. And they did. And some people would show up. Like I have one character and she's got stiletto heels and legs up to here and just sassy. She just showed up at the door one time, but I like her as well as any of the rest, you know, those accidental characters to help you. That's all you do is get your story in your mind and sit down, don't think about how ridiculous what you're doing is, and just do it. So my daddy was able to read it before he died. My mama said, "Where'd you get that language?" Because I said damn and hell one time, because it was appropriate for that character.
Right.
"Where'd you get that language?" "I think you ought to call Spike Lee." You know, that left brain mother, right brain daddy. I'm proud of you, sissy. You know, but he did read it, and he died. My deadline was May, and then he died that Father's Day in June.
Wow.
1995. So that's how I wrote the
screenplay.
No, it wasn't audacious, really. It's not my nature. I'd rather be under that stew with a sack over my head. But
oh my goodness.
Anyway, you may as well acknowledge what you're doing, even if you stumbled into it. And so that, you want to hear where that screenplay led me, or are we to break time
after
yet?
our break.
Okay.
We'll be right back after these messages. welcome back to Kaleidoscope. So Elsie, finished telling us about your first screenplay.
Okay, that'd be my pleasure. But I want to mention the second one.
Okay.
Because it's important. This is the hardest thing I've ever done, but a beautiful lady from Jamaica whom I met in Georgia Writers, and she's now moved to St. Mary's Island, but we are still like sisters, and had written, she wanted to write, and she finally got a book published, and it's called Raising Dead Issues. And it's a very complex story, but it was a good story. And it's about a house. If you go car to Z, you've probably passed Enigma, but there is a place there where there's an archway. And I recall it from my younger years, somewhere in South Georgia, you go under an archway to get into the town. Well, she goes as a writer to take a break. She finds this place, I won't say what because I don't remember. Wants to go there, there's a bed and breakfast, and write. That's her intent. And so she travels car to Z, and because she's in Columbus at that time, and crazy things happen. I mean, cows fly, a little girl on a bicycle comes up to her car. Her husband brought her this Volkswagen, and up to her car, riding this bicycle, taunting her. Road signs change, just strange things all the way till she finally gets to her destination and goes through the arches into this little village. And there's a fortune teller there, there's the bed and breakfast, there's a praying group, there's voodoo in the woods. And what she doesn't realize when she went through those arches is that once you enter under those arches, the town has a curse on it, and of long standing, and you can't get out. And people are turned into stones, their souls into these stones, and people can carry them out. It's a very good, creepy story.
Sounds very
Tyler
intricate.
Perry, are you watching? Because I have 2 screenplays. So I knew there was a good story in here, and so I adapted it into a screenplay. And a screenplay, every page represents a minute in a movie. So you really have to distill and get just, I mean, she has several little backstories going, but I had to extract the main story out of here. And there's some really rich characters, but to anybody who's ever adapted a novel into a screenplay, I think midway but I was determined. There again, you know you're supposed to do something. I mean, I really wanted to kill myself in the process, but I don't know how I hung on. Thank goodness I hadn't met him yet. But it got done, and then consequently, because the screenplay is limited, each page is a minute, you have 120 minutes or less, because you know that's that many minutes, and movies are typically 2 hours. And anyway, so I did it, and I want to say thank you, Annie Wright. I'm so proud to know you, and I hope this is on the big screen one day. But she's since written another book, which I also love, called, and I edited that one for her. And she wasn't like Steve Scott, who when I edited his books, paid me with chicken manure. No, she paid me actually money.
Green paper.
Yes.
money.
Oh yes, she's wonderful. But I did work for it. I truly did. But this is, in her latest book is Dirt Blood Red, and equally so. Annie, that's for you. Now, to get back to the Shoebox Angel, the first screenplay, I had to, this is the book I checked out at the library in Columbus. So I went by it.
It worked for you.
Yes. Oops. And as I said, Gary Hartman was leading Experiencing God at Valley Rescue Mission. And this all gave me courage to act on what I was taught there. And so the screenplay, which is right here if you want to come by it, actually was submitted. And then after that time, I received an invitation to a screenwriting workshop. And I'll tell the story of that. I want to give credit to everyone who's done so much for me. And it has to start here. Esther Luttrell worked at MGM for 29 years. And then all of a sudden, after I submitted that to the Nicholas Fellowship, and I was in church and working all during that time, and I had a pastor who collected clowns. This brings in some of my art, and that's why I painted this for him. And he told me, he read the screenplay, and Rhonda Mobley proofread it for me. But when I got that invitation from Esther, I mean, here I am, scared enough. No, I overcame. No, I didn't overcome. It was God. I don't take credit. I talked to my pastor about it, and he said, Elsie, he said, you've done this, and now if a door opens, you have to go through it. Mm-hmm. Gulp. So here I am invited by this wonderful lady to Burt Reynolds Ranch for a screenplay workshop, Esther Luttrell. And that was her workbook then. When I got down there, it's real dog-eared now. And then now she's put it into book form. So it'd be a lot easier for you if you want to write a screenplay to get it in book form. And so that's Esther that I owe everything to. And so based on what the Experiencing God taught me, showed me, then here's Burt Reynolds Ranch, which you won't be able to see, and our workshop. Oh, I know. Here I am standing at Burt Reynolds Soundstage where the conference was held. And if you'll notice, I have on an eye patch. I just had Bell's palsy. And that was one of my arguments with Esther about not being able to, we had talked by phone. And the sweetest voice on the other side, I thought this was her receptionist. And then she'd switch me to Esther, you know, the tough woman who worked at MGM, the businesswoman. Well, that sweet voice was Esther. And so I said, but once I got over that shock, that I actually was talking. She worked with Donald Gold, who produced Miami Vice, which I saw him at several. But also here I met the man who wrote and produced Mommy Dearest, Joan Crawford's ex-son-in-law. Okay. A lot of interesting people there. Anyway, I said, but I have Bell's palsy. And, you know, she said, honey, those people down there won't care. You just put on that eye patch and come on. And then I hate to tell you, let this out, Esther, she kept dropping the price. Because I guess she had I mean, she was out there in Hollywood. She
Yeah.
had to have foreknowledge. So, anyway, based on what my pastor said, and here was an open door.
Right, walk through
And
it.
so, here's the one who hadn't even read a screenplay, much less written one, now surrounded by all these, with my eye patch on. I painted an eyeball and put some jewels on it. So Rachel. and here's the little, he had a motorized stagecoach, but this is the chapel where he had built to marry Lonnie Anderson.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that, and plus his sound stage had all these from sets in Hollywood, like Smokey and the Bandit's gas station was there somewhere.
Oh,
and,
wow.
and the bar from, what was that, Gunsmoke? And just a lot of different things like that. So it was very interesting. And I had my screenplay with me, but after looking through her book on screenplay writing, which I went by the other guys, I just stuck it back in my little satchel and went home and opened that workbook and just rewrote it. And then sent it to her, which she had asked me in the meantime down there. And that's the thing about Esther, is she is so geared to helping struggling writers. She became a screenplay mentor.
Oh, wow.
And her red lines, I have copies of, I did 6 rewrites with her. And see, it's like it's layered. And some mistakes you can't even see till you get the first layer off. And Esther was sitting up at nights in Hollywood with her red pen, doing me the greatest favor for free. So I'll never forget who helped me so much. I mean, she's the reason. So, okay, we start down that road. In the second place, because of Esther, that I go is Concord, Massachusetts, by way of Boston. And she always took such good care of me. So I fly into Boston. Number one, I don't know the airport's on an island. And this is me again. It's like door open, go through it, get on a jet by yourself. I found all my airline tickets from all of this. And so you do it. And the guy who picked me up at the airport, this is Wonderland, was Scott Anderson, who was president of Harvard Square Screenwriters. So he tours me through Harvard. And during the course of this, I get invited to one of their screenwriting sessions. But we have our Esther screenwriting conference too, which I got an option offer from John Bottoms, who is connected to this area. He wanted to option it. And the only stipulation he asked me there, he said, I'll read your screenplay, but you have to pay me in barbecue sauce, because he had lived down here before and you just couldn't get barbecue sauce Southern style up there in Boston.
Oh, wow.
So our actual screenplay conference was held at, was that St. Oh, I need to put on my glasses now.
St. Bernard's.
St. Bernard's Conference Place. They're in Concord, Massachusetts, which is very historic.
Wow.
She had a fife and drum corps start the thing off. And this is Scott Anderson himself. This is the nicest guy. His wife was a scientist at Harvard. This is Esther and I there. And this is Donald Gold, who I met there. And this is outside Louisa May Alcott's home.
Oh.
Which I toured, thanks to Esther. Donald Gold again. and me standing in front of Louisa May Alcott's house.
Her house.
How precious is that?
Wow.
So that was, during the course of that visit.
You went to the Cheers bar.
Yeah. And the Alcott farm, orchard house.
Wow.
And the guy at the door, bless his heart, at Cheers, I had on my necklace with all my little grandchildren jewels.
Yeah.
And he had me show ID. I said, "Oh Lord, let me hug your neck." He just did that. I'm sure he knew. So that was Boston and Concord.
Well, we're going to go to a break right quick.
Okay.
Now that we're out of Boston, we'll be right back after these messages.
Watch Focused on East Alabama Monday nights at 7:30 p.m. on EATV Channel 7.
And welcome back to Kaleidoscope. So Elsie, your screenwriting venture took you all the way to Hollywood.
Yes, it did. Again, through Esther, to Ken I was invited to Ken Rotkopp's pitch mark because he had read my screenplay, and got to meet about 25 or 30 producers, and this is like every 6 months. Okay, and that was a major thrill. That was in 2007. And then also locally, I wrote with the 24-hour plays with Troy Hurd, Chattahoochee Shakespeare Company at the Liberty Theater. That was a thrill. And so...
and you're also a poet, and you brought a story to share with us with a poem today.
Yes. I would like to thank and mention Ron Self, Brick Road Poetry, who is responsible for anything I know about poetry and has tried to make me a better poet. And he is supreme. He's the master poet, and he's on Facebook and has a website, Brick Road Poetry, and they publish books of poetry. Okay, Ron Self. Okay, and okay.
Well, let's throw a little credit your way. Tell us the story behind the poem, or as it relates to the poem.
Okay, this is entitled "Shall We Dance," and I told them the story of how I met my husband, David Ezell, and it was totally accidental. And we were invited to an NSAI, Nashville Songwriters Association, which I was kind of hung around on the fringes of and wrote about in playgrounds for several years. Great group of songwriters. And so they had, a lot of the musicians were allowed to perform at River City Grill. And Stan Edwards and Marcia Short were playing that night. And so I went on a Wednesday night, passed by David at the end of the table, and went on down and took a seat. And Darlene and Randy Dameron was sitting to my left. Well, anyway, Stan and Marcia started playing this real slow, wonderful song. And I was a widow at the time and always joking around. But the song was so wonderful. And I just slapped my hand on the table and said, I need a man. And David on the far end, who was in a state of depression, I guess that explains it, stood up and said, well, here I am. And then he came around and extended his hand. It wasn't a dancey place, but all of them, Darlene, get up, Elsie, he wants you to dance. So it became a dancey place.
And that was in 2010.
November 3rd, 2010, 8:05 p.m. Okay.
But you had written this poem a year prior.
Shall we dance? And so finally, after, and plus we lived in the same neighborhood, come to find out, 7 houses apart. But when I finally, of course, that was the beginning of our friendship relationship and eventual marriage in July of 2011, 12? Anyway, I finally remembered I had written this poem and shared it at Georgia Poetry, and Sandra Haluska, who's on the staff with me, and Ron Self for Chattahoochee Valley Writers Conference. We've kind of all been together since 2005 and have an annual conference. Well, anyway, Sandra Haluska was there that night, and she just loved this poem. And she took it and put it in book form. They owned a printing thing. And so I'm going to read this one. Shall we dance? It's just a dance, he said, nothing serious, mysterious, delirious. A 1 and a 2. Here's me, and then there's you. Just a dance, sir? Indeed. Then you've never danced a tango whose nuance takes months to even know. There are twists and turns the average mind can't fathom. It's just a dance, he said, nothing less, nothing more. Supposing you and I just two-step to the beat, my feet, your feet, back and forth across the floor. Just a dance, sir? Absurd. Then you've never tripped the light fantastic. There are dips and twirls so difficult to manage. You must be like spandex or good elastic. It takes practice to lead your partner to full advantage. It's just a dance, he said. There's nothing here to dread. We step, we sway until the music fades. Then we change partners as we go our separate ways. Just a dance, sir? I beg your pardon. You've not danced an intricate fandango where the partners breathe as one, in tune with no one else, or else there's no meshing of the flesh. Then he took her hand, gently led her to the floor. It's just a dance, he whispered, smiling as he held her in his arms. Soon she learned that he had charms former partners had not known, how to turn a simple dance into a moan. And she cried, more.
Wonderful.
So.
Little did you know that was a prophetic
I know. When
poem,
I found that and showed it to him, he just teared up. You know, he couldn't believe it. So
wow.
That's life.
Well, tell us some about your artwork.
My artwork.
What mediums do you use? What's your favorites? What subjects do you like to paint the most?
Okay. Well, I started taking lessons with Frenessy Rachel Doherty at CSU. And the first class I ever took was watercolor, which is really the hardest medium. You mess it up, that's it.
Yeah.
Just tear it up and throw it away. But in a way, I guess that was good because it was good discipline. and then drawing, and finally we were out at the original Elizabeth Turner place in a room, and then they finished that space age thing at the Rankin.
Oh, yeah.
And so I kind of, I had oil for the first time there, and that was incredible because you could paint white over black, and coming from watercolor to that kind of freedom was wonderful. And then in the last few years, maybe 4 years ago, I took art lessons with the wonderful Rita Geiger Mead. So that's kind of the background there. Even though my daughter teaches art and has a degree in it, I just never, I'd draw things, and my mother would go, you know, so I just never went there. It was more about writing, and that's how that happened.
Okay, and songwriting. You're a member of NSAI?
They let me tag around for a few years, and so since I was a poet, I had already written some poems, and like at Ron Self's encouragement, I wrote one very classic called Fresh Out of Chitlins.
Oh yeah, Fresh Out of Chitlins.
Yeah, and then another one called Lullaby Cries, which is the sounds at night before you go. You know, we pray the Lord. Both of those, okay, so I wrote those poems. And you remember MySpace, the greatest deserted playground in the world? Well, I had put up some of my poetry there. And Jim Patrick, who's in NSAI and a wonderful musician, unknown to me, took those 2 poems and set them to music and, you know, refined them.
Yes.
And then in this incredible tale of, you know, if the door opens.
Right.
He and I recorded those 2 songs, and you can see them on Facebook or
YouTube.
What's that other thing?
YouTube?
Reverb Nation.
Reverb Nation.
Yeah.
Okay. Fresh Out of Chitlins
Fresh
and
Out,
Lullaby
that's a
Cries.
classic. I'm so proud to have come from Lumpkin. It came in, yeah, even though that's an Alabama thing. But yeah, Jim took those and set them to music, and we actually sang a duet, 2 duets. And yeah, NSAI, just an incredibly talented group of musicians and songwriters that I was privileged to hang out with. And then that's how I met that guy, even though he was 7
You walked through the
away.
open door, and there he was.
Yeah, so that just kind of combined everything.
Yeah, wow. God has a plan for our lives.
I would say so.
Absolutely. Well, tell our viewers what your contact information is, or where any of your artwork or poetry or anything is posted, where they can see it or read it.
Well, if you can still find MySpace, you'll see some poetry there. And then on Facebook, it's Elsie Austin. It doesn't have the /Ezel, but if you Google Elsie Austin, you'll find all these things. So, and I guess that's pretty much where you can find me.
Okay, so Facebook, Elsie Austin, and any other?
Now there's another Facebook site for the Chattahoochee Valley Writers Conference that also has that name, and then one that doesn't. So if you want to know about the Writers Conference, that's where you'd go for that.
And that's a yearly event?
Yes, the last weekend in September.
And that's held in Columbus?
Columbus at the Macon Road Library. They've been so wonderful to us. I'm treasurer there, started out as registrar.
I remember that.
Yeah, way back in 2004 or something. And now Ron Self, once again, is the president of Chattahoochee Writers Incorporated. We are a nonprofit.
Okay.
So,
well, is there any words of wisdom or anything you want to share with our viewers that maybe they want to write but are scared to or too shy?
As I did, you don't have to be informed. You just have to be open to it and trust that you'll be led along that path. And everybody thinks it's hard, but the #1 rule of writing is keep your derriere in the chair.
In the chair, and write about what you know. That's
Well,
my.
I don't know. You can get beyond that, and things can come out of that. Well, I guess you had to
can.
know it.
Depends on what kind of upbringing you had, I guess.
Because,
what went on in your life.
I do the quarterly writers weekly. Quarterly, they have a 24-hour short story contest and cash money, and they give you, everybody gets the same prompt. So I wrote one, and it was involved leaves and capes, and so I went back to my memory of having been in Concord, Massachusetts in October, where the leafers,
Oh yeah.
in such a quaint little village, I used, and apples. So I had to conjure up something so that, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
So for those who have never written anything before, you
And
just
get out and experience
Yeah.
things and listen to people. So, I mean, because dialogue is so important in there, and it's got, and then she took it to her hand, and then they all sat down. No, people do not communicate that way. Just be natural, sit in places like restaurants and listen. And fortunately, I'd had a wide range of opportunities to listen to different dialects, so it came natural.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us here on
Thank you,
Kaleidoscope.
you too.
You're welcome, Eth. And that's it for this week's episode of Kaleidoscope. Thank you for joining us.